They try to bribe Ibrahim Traoré's wife, but she records everything on video. Dr. Jamila Traoré adjusted her stethoscope as she finished examining her last patient at the Centre Hospitalier Universitaire Yalgado Ouedraogo. Despite being the president's wife, she maintained her medical practice, treating patients in the public hospital where she had worked for over a decade. The modest clinic, with cracked walls and outdated equipment, contrasted sharply with the opulent lifestyle she could have chosen as First Lady. "Doctor, there are visitors waiting in your office," announced Nurse Aminata, her expression concerned. "They say they're from an international medical foundation, but arrived without appointment and refused to state their business clearly." Jamila frowned. Unscheduled visits had become common since Ibrahim's rise to power, usually from organizations seeking presidential access through family connections. She had developed protocols for handling such approaches, always documenting interactions that might later be misinterpreted. "How many visitors?" she asked, removing her medical coat. "3 men in expensive suits. They've waited nearly an hour and seem insistent about speaking with you personally." Something in Aminata's tone triggered Jamila's instincts. In 15 years of medical practice, she had learned to read people quickly. The combination of persistence, formal attire, and vague credentials often indicated motives beyond legitimate medical consultation. "Show them in, but stay nearby. Also, bring tea for our guests." As Aminata departed, Jamila discreetly activated her smartphone's recording application, a precaution adopted after previous encounters with individuals seeking to exploit her position. The device, concealed behind medical journals, would capture both audio and video of the interaction. 3 men entered carrying themselves with practiced confidence of professional diplomats or corporate executives. The leader, a well-dressed European in his 50s, extended a manicured hand with a calculated smile. "Dr. Traoré, thank you for seeing us," he began in accented French. "I am Henri Dubois, representing the Geneva Foundation for African Medical Development. My colleagues are Dr. Andreas Muller from Switzerland and Mr. James Richardson from the United Kingdom." Jamila shook hands while studying their faces carefully. Dubois possessed the smooth manner of someone accustomed to high-stakes negotiations, while Muller appeared nervous despite professional credentials. Richardson maintained a neutral expression, eyes constantly scanning the office environment. "Please, gentlemen, have a seat," she offered, gesturing toward simple plastic chairs. The contrast between their expensive attire and modest surroundings was immediately apparent, though she noted their momentary surprise at the clinic's basic conditions. "We appreciate your time, Doctor," Dubois continued, settling uncomfortably. "We understand you maintain an active medical practice despite your elevated circumstances." "Medicine is my calling," Jamila replied simply. "My husband's political responsibilities don't change my commitment to serving patients." "Ah, admirable," Richardson interjected, his British accent crisp. "In fact, your dedication to public health care is precisely why we're here today." Dubois opened an expensive briefcase and withdrew glossy brochures featuring modern medical facilities, advanced equipment, and patients receiving treatment in pristine environment. "The Geneva Foundation has observed healthcare challenges facing Burkina Faso," he explained, spreading materials across her desk. "We're prepared to offer substantial assistance, new hospitals, modern equipment, training programs for medical staff, and comprehensive pharmaceutical supplies." Jamila examined the brochures with professional interest. The facilities represented significant improvements over current infrastructure, and medical equipment alone would cost millions. However, her experience with international aid programs taught her to look beyond impressive presentations. "This appears substantial," she observed carefully. "What would be the Foundation's requirements for such investment?" The 3 men exchanged glances, momentary hesitation that Jamila noted with growing suspicion. Muller cleared his throat and spoke for the first time since introductions. "Naturally, such significant commitment would require certain assurances regarding policy continuity and stability," he said, his German accent making diplomatic language sound more formal. "Could you be more specific about these assurances?" Jamila pressed, her medical training emphasizing precise communication. Richardson leaned forward, adopting a confidential tone. "Dr. Traoré, We recognize your husband has been making policy adjustments since assuming office. Some changes have created uncertainties in the international investment community. What my colleagues diplomatically suggest, Dubois added with practiced smoothness, is that certain recent decisions regarding mineral rights and foreign military partnerships have raised concerns among potential donors to healthcare initiatives. The conversation was moving exactly where Jamila had anticipated. Behind the medical foundation facade lay the same pressures Ibrahim faced daily, attempts to influence Burkina Faso's policy through various channels when direct governmental approaches proved unsuccessful. Dubois smiled with practiced patience, reaching into his briefcase for additional materials. These documents appeared more substantial than previous brochures, detailed architectural plans, budget projections, and implementation timelines, suggesting considerable advance preparation. Dr. Traoré, perhaps we haven't adequately conveyed our proposal's scope, he said, spreading new materials across her desk. We're discussing a 10-year, $400 million healthcare transformation program. Not simply aid, but genuine partnership in modernizing Burkina Faso's entire medical infrastructure. The figures were staggering. Jamila's professional mind immediately calculated the impact such funding could have. Thousands of lives saved, medical training for hundreds of practitioners, equipment that would transform treatment capabilities across the country. Yet the presentation's timing and approach continued triggering her instincts about hidden agendas. The program would begin with flagship hospitals in Ouagadougou and Bobo Dioulasso, Richardson explained, pointing to detailed architectural renderings. Each facility would be equipped with the most advanced medical technology available, staffed through international exchange programs, and supplied through long-term pharmaceutical partnerships. Muller opened his laptop, displaying additional materials, video presentations of similar projects in other African countries, testimonials from medical professionals, and statistical analyses showing dramatic improvements in health outcomes where the foundation had previously invested. In Ghana, our partnership reduced infant mortality by 60% within 5 years, he noted with evident pride. In Senegal, we established the first cardiac surgery program in the region. The potential for similar impact in Burkina Faso is enormous. Jamila studied the presentations with genuine interest. Despite growing suspicions about the visitor's true motivations, the medical benefits were undeniable, and her professional commitment to improving healthcare made the proposal deeply appealing on humanitarian grounds. These are impressive achievements, she acknowledged, but I remain unclear why you're presenting this to me rather than through official government channels. The three men exchanged another series of glances before Dubois assumed a more confidential demeanor. Dr. Traoré, we've attempted to engage through traditional diplomatic channels. However, certain recent policy decisions have created complications in those discussions. Specifically, Richardson added, the decision to terminate existing security arrangements with France and the controversial mineral rights negotiations have raised concerns among our donor organizations. Our board members, Muller continued, include representatives from several European pharmaceutical companies and medical equipment manufacturers. They're naturally cautious about major investments in politically unstable environments. The conversation was approaching its crucial moment, and Jamila ensured her recording device remained properly positioned while maintaining an expression of professional interest. What exactly are you proposing? She asked directly. Dubois leaned forward, his voice dropping to a more intimate register. We believe that your influence with the president could help address these concerns, not through direct political intervention, but through gentle guidance regarding the benefits of maintaining positive international relationships. For instance, Richardson elaborated, the lithium mining concessions currently under negotiation, rather than the nationalization approach being considered, a partnership model with established European companies would provide greater stability for long-term healthcare investment. Muller nodded enthusiastically. Similarly, the security arrangements. While we understand sovereignty concerns, maintaining some level of cooperation with traditional allies provides reassurance to international donors about long-term stability. The true nature of their visit was now completely clear. Under the guise of humanitarian assistance, they were attempting to use her position as First Lady to influence Ibrahim's policy decisions. effectively asking her to serve as an intermediary for foreign interests, seeking to reverse his administration's independence-oriented reforms. And if these policy adjustments were made? Jamila asked, maintaining careful neutrality while ensuring every word was clearly recorded. The healthcare partnership would proceed immediately, Dubois replied with evident satisfaction at her apparent interest. But more than that, Dr. Traoré, we recognize that your own career and aspirations matter. The Foundation is prepared to establish an endowed chair in your name at any European medical university you choose. Richardson opened another folder containing what appeared to be preliminary agreements and financial projections. A personal research foundation, funding for advanced medical training, opportunities to lead international health initiatives, your professional development would be supported at the highest levels. We're talking about transforming you from a regional medical practitioner into a globally recognized healthcare leader, Mueller added enthusiastically. Think of the impact you could have on African healthcare development through such a platform. The disappointment in their faces was immediate and unmistakable, though each man attempted to conceal it with varying degrees of diplomatic skill. Dubois maintained his professional composure, but Richardson's expression hardened perceptibly, while Mueller fidgeted with obvious discomfort at the unexpected resistance. "Of course, Dr. Traoré," Dubois replied smoothly, though his tone had lost its earlier warmth. "Such important decisions require careful consideration. However, I should mention that these opportunities are time-sensitive due to our board's upcoming budget approvals." "How time-sensitive?" Jamila asked, maintaining her neutral demeanor while noting the subtle shift toward pressure tactic. Richardson consulted his expensive watch with theatrical precision. "Our board convenes in Geneva next week to finalize African investment allocation. Frankly, Burkina Faso's position on that agenda depends largely on current political trajectory assessment." "What Mr. Richardson means," Mueller interjected nervously, "is that investment decisions must be made based on stability projections. Certain recent policy directions have raised questions about long-term viability." Dubois nodded gravely. "We're not the only organization conducting such assessments, Doctor. The European Union's Development Aid Review, World Bank Infrastructure Lending, International Monetary Fund Technical Assistance, all these evaluations are proceeding simultaneously." The implicit threat was becoming explicit. They were suggesting that Burkina Faso's access to international development assistance across multiple organizations depended on policy reversals that could only be influenced through channels like herself. "Are you saying that humanitarian aid is conditional on political compliance?" Jamila asked directly, ensuring the recording captured their response clearly. "Not conditional," Dubois replied carefully, "but realistic about operating environment. Medical foundations, like all international organizations, must consider sustainability factors when making long-term commitment." Richardson leaned forward with increased intensity. "Dr. Traoré, perhaps we should speak more frankly. Your husband's administration has made several decisions that concern international partners: the abrupt termination of security agreements, the nationalization threats regarding mineral resources, the warming relationships with non-traditional allies. These policies," Mueller added, "create uncertainty that affects not just our foundation, but the entire network of international organizations that could support Burkina Faso's development." Dubois withdrew a folder containing what appeared to be financial projections and policy analyses. "Consider the numbers, Doctor. Current international assistance to Burkina Faso totals approximately $800 million annually across all sectors. Healthcare represents only one component. But," Richardson continued, "these funding streams require confidence in governmental stability and policy predictability. Recent changes have generated concerns that affect funding decisions across multiple donor organizations." The three men were now presenting a coordinated argument that went far beyond healthcare assistance. They were describing a systematic approach to influencing Burkina Faso's policy through coordinated pressure across multiple international organizations, essentially economic coercion disguised as humanitarian concern. "What specifically would need to change?" Jamila asked, recognizing that their answer would provide crucial evidence of foreign interference in national sovereignty. Mueller consulted his notes before responding. The mineral rights legislation currently under consideration should include provisions for international partnerships rather than complete nationalization. The security arrangements should maintain some level of cooperation with NATO allies. The foreign policy orientation should avoid exclusively aligning with certain powers. In practical terms, Dubois elaborated, we're suggesting a more balanced approach that recognizes Burkina Faso's need for diverse international partnerships rather than dramatic policy reversals that concern traditional allies. Richardson's mask of diplomatic courtesy was slipping as frustration became increasingly apparent. Dr. Traoré, let me be absolutely clear. Your husband's current trajectory is leading toward international isolation. Countries that choose confrontation over cooperation typically find themselves excluded from beneficial partnerships. The healthcare crisis in Burkina Faso is severe, Mueller added with apparent urgency. Infant mortality, maternal deaths, infectious disease outbreaks, these problems require international assistance that simply won't be available if current tensions continue. Are you suggesting, Jamila asked slowly, that medical assistance would be withheld if political demands aren't met? We're suggesting, Dubois replied with cold precision, that political realities affect humanitarian possibilities. Organizations cannot operate effectively in hostile environments. The conversation had crossed a crucial line. They were no longer discussing conditional aid, but explicitly threatening to withhold humanitarian assistance unless political compliance was achieved. As the three men prepared their materials for departure, clearly dissatisfied with her non-committal responses, Jamila made a decision that would have far-reaching consequences. Rather than simply allowing them to leave with polite diplomatic ambiguity, she chose to push for even more explicit statements that would leave no doubt about their true intention. "Before you go, gentlemen," she said, maintaining her professional demeanor, "I want to ensure I understand your proposal completely. You're representing that a $400 million healthcare investment depends on my ability to influence presidential policy decisions?" Dubois paused in closing his briefcase, clearly recognizing the dangerous directness of her question. "Dr. Traoré, we've outlined various factors that affect international cooperation and development assistance. But specifically," she pressed, "you're asking me to convince my husband to reverse decisions about mineral rights and security arrangements in exchange for medical aid and personal career opportunities." Richardson's diplomatic composure finally cracked completely. "Doctor, let's not play games. Your husband's policies are damaging Burkina Faso's international relationships. We're offering constructive alternatives that benefit everyone involved, including threatening to withhold humanitarian assistance if political demands aren't met?" Jamila asked directly. "We're describing realities," Mueller replied with obvious discomfort. "International cooperation requires cooperation." Dubois stepped forward, abandoning all pretense of diplomatic courtesy. "Dr. Traoré, your husband has 6 months to demonstrate pragmatic leadership. After that, international patience will be exhausted. The consequences will affect not just political relationships, but economic assistance, development partnerships, and individual opportunities." "Are you threatening my country and my family?" Jamila asked, her voice carrying a steel that surprised even her. "We're describing inevitable consequences of current trajectories," Richardson replied coldly. "Smart leaders adapt to international realities rather than fighting them uselessly. And if I refuse to serve as your intermediary," she pressed, "then you'll share responsibility for the isolation and hardship that follows," Dubois said with unmistakable menace. "Intelligent people choose cooperation over confrontation." Mueller, clearly uncomfortable with the conversation's direction, attempted to restore diplomatic language. "Doctor, we're simply hoping you'll consider the broader implications for your country's future and your own professional development." "The broader implications," Richardson added with renewed intensity, "include understanding that countries opposing international consensus typically face very difficult circumstances. We're offering an alternative path, one that requires my husband to abandon his principles and submit to foreign demands?" Jamila asked. "One that recognizes international realities and chooses pragmatic cooperation over ideological confrontation," Dubois replied with finality. As the three men gathered their materials and prepared to leave, Jamila made one final probe designed to capture their intentions with absolute clarity. "Let me summarize your visit," she said calmly. "You've offered substantial healthcare aid and personal career opportunities in exchange for my influence over presidential policies. You've threatened to withhold humanitarian assistance and pursue international isolation if these policy changes don't occur. You've suggested that my family's future depends on compliance with your demands. We've presented opportunities and described realities," Dubois replied tersely. "How you interpret and respond to that information is your choice. But the consequences of choosing non-cooperation include both national isolation and personal professional damage," she pressed. "Actions have consequences," Richardson stated bluntly. "Wise leaders consider those consequences carefully." After they departed, Jamila remained in her office for several minutes, ensuring the recording had captured every crucial exchange. The evidence was devastating. Explicit attempts to influence national policy through personal pressure, threats to withhold humanitarian aid, and clear documentation of foreign interference in Burkina Faso's sovereignty. She immediately called Ibrahim's private number, requesting an urgent meeting without explaining details over potentially monitored communications. When he arrived at the hospital 2 hours later with minimal security, she guided him to her office and played the entire recording. Ibrahim's expression grew increasingly grim as he listened to the conversation, occasionally pausing to make notes or ask for clarification about specific statements. When the recording concluded, he sat in silence for several minutes before speaking. "This is exactly what we suspected but couldn't prove," he said finally. "Sophisticated pressure through multiple channels, targeting family members, using humanitarian needs as leverage for political compliance." 3 days later, President Ibrahim Traoré stood before a packed auditorium at the University of Ouagadougou, preparing to deliver what would become one of the most significant speeches of his presidency. The audience included students, faculty, diplomatic representatives, and journalists from across Africa and beyond. Unknown to most attendees, they were about to witness the public revelation of evidence that would reshape understanding of international pressure tactics in African politics. "Citizens of Burkina Faso, fellow Africans, and international observers," Traoré began, his voice carrying the gravity of momentous disclosure. "Today I share with you documented evidence of attempts to undermine our national sovereignty through the systematic manipulation of humanitarian assistance, personal relationships, and professional opportunities." The auditorium fell completely silent as the implications of his opening statement registered across the diverse audience. "3 days ago," he continued, "representatives claiming to work for international humanitarian organizations approached my wife, Dr. Jamila Traoré, with proposals that appeared to offer substantial medical assistance to our country." He gestured toward a large screen where the first images appeared, the glossy brochures and impressive facility photographs that had begun the visitor's presentation. "However, as you will see, these humanitarian offers were conditional on specific political compliance that would effectively reverse key decisions of our democratically elected government." The screen now displayed carefully selected audio transcripts from Jamila's recording, highlighting the most damaging quotations where the visitors explicitly linked aid to policy changes. "The lithium mining concessions currently under negotiation should include provisions for international partnerships rather than complete nationalization," Traoré read from the transcript. "The security arrangements should maintain some level of cooperation with traditional allies." Murmurs of recognition and anger rippled through the audience as the systematic nature of the pressure became clear. But the manipulation extended beyond national policy to personal intimidation, Traoré continued, his voice hardening with controlled fury. "These representatives threatened both our country's international relationships and my family's personal future if compliance was not achieved." The screen showed additional transcript excerpts. "Your husband has 6 months to demonstrate pragmatic leadership. After that, international patience will be exhausted." Countries opposing international consensus typically face very difficult circumstances. The audience's reaction was immediate and intense. Students began chanting slogans of support, while diplomatic representatives shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Most disturbing, Traoré continued, was their explicit threat to withhold humanitarian assistance, medical aid that could save thousands of lives, unless political demands were met. This represents the weaponization of human suffering for political control. He paused, allowing the full implications to settle before continuing with the most damaging revelation. These individuals claimed to represent not just one organization, but a coordinated network including the European Union, World Bank, International Monetary Fund, and various private foundations. They described systematic efforts to pressure our government through multiple channels simultaneously. The diplomatic section of the audience was now visibly agitated, with several representatives making urgent phone calls or sending messages. Furthermore, Traoré announced, preliminary investigations suggest that similar approaches have been made to officials in at least 6 other African countries, indicating a continental-scale effort to influence political decisions through personal and humanitarian leverage. The revelation that this was not an isolated incident but part of a broader pattern sent shockwaves through the audience and, via live broadcasting, across Africa. Today, I announce several immediate responses to these documented attempts at foreign interference, Traoré declared, his voice rising with determination. First, we are sharing this evidence with the African Union, ECOWAS, and the United Nations as documentation of systematic attempts to undermine African sovereignty through humanitarian manipulation. Second, we are establishing the African Anti-Corruption and Interference Documentation Center, headquartered here in Ouagadougou, to collect and analyze similar attempts across our continent. Third, we are implementing new protocols requiring all international aid organizations to submit to transparency audits and public disclosure of their funding sources and policy conditions. The applause was thunderous and sustained, with delegates from other African countries rising to show their support.